Heavenly Stories.
The sun beat down on the dusty plains, and the Israelites, a nation of former slaves, trudged forward, their hearts pounding with both hope and fear. They'd just escaped Egypt, where they'd toiled under Pharaoh's whip for generations. Moses, their leader, had stood up to the mighty ruler, demanding freedom in the name of God. 10 plagues later, Pharaoh finally let them go, but now, as the Israelites camped near the Red Sea, word spread like wildfire: Pharaoh had changed his mind. His chariots, his soldiers, his whole army was coming, fast. The people looked back and saw the dust clouds rising in the distance, the glint of spears catching the sunlight. Panic set in. "Why'd you bring us out here, Moses?" they cried. "To die in the desert? We were better off as slaves." Their voices were sharp, desperate. Some clutched their children, others fell to their knees, staring at the sea ahead, a vast, uncrossable barrier. They were trapped, pinned between Pharaoh's wrath and the deep waters. Moses, though, stood tall, his weathered face calm despite the chaos. He'd seen God's power before: the burning bush, the plagues, the Passover. He held up his hand, his voice steady but firm. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Stand firm, and you'll see what the Lord's gonna do today. The Egyptians you see now, you'll never see them again." The people hushed, half doubting, half hoping. Moses turned toward the sea, his staff gripped tightly, waiting for God to speak. The wind began to pick up, rustling through the camp. The Israelites didn't know it yet, but something big was coming. God had a plan, and it wasn't gonna involve surrender. The same God who'd broken Pharaoh's pride was about to do something no one could have imagined. The sea, that impossible wall of water, was no match for the one who'd called Moses from a burning bush. The people just had to wait, and trust. As night fell, the Israelites' fear grew thicker than the darkness. The sound of Pharaoh's chariots was closer now, the rumble of hooves shaking the ground. Families huddled together, whispering prayers or complaints. Some stared at Moses, wondering if this man who'd promised freedom had led them to their doom. But Moses wasn't shaken. He'd learned something in the wilderness: when God calls you, he doesn't leave you hanging. Then, God's voice came, clear as day, not to Moses' ears but to his heart. "Why are you crying out to me?" the Lord said. "Tell the people to move forward. Raise your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. The Israelites will walk through on dry ground." Moses blinked, gripping his staff. Divide the sea. It sounded impossible, but he'd seen God turn a river to blood and send locusts to devour Egypt's crops. If God said it, it was as good as done. Moses stepped toward the water's edge, the crowd parting like a curtain. The sea stretched out before him, its waves glinting under the moonlight, vast and unyielding. He raised his staff, his arms steady despite recent changes, the weight of a nation's doubt on his shoulders. "Move forward," he shouted to the people. They hesitated, glancing at the water, then back at the approaching army. But something in Moses' voice, maybe the fire in his eyes, maybe the memory of God's miracles, stirred them. And then, it happened. A wind roared in from the east, stronger than any storm they'd ever seen. It howled across the sea, pushing the waters back, rolling them like a scroll. The waves parted, standing up like walls, and the seabed dried out, solid as rock. The Israelites gasped, their complaints turning to whispers of awe. God was moving, just like Moses said he would. The path was clear, but the journey? That was gonna take faith. The Israelites stood frozen, staring at the miracle before them. The Red Sea, moments ago a wall of water, was now a corridor of dry ground, flanked by towering waves held back by an invisible hand. The wind still roared, but the path was clear, impossibly clear. Moses waved them forward, his staff still raised. "Go," he urged. "The Lord's fighting for you." The first few stepped onto the seabed, their sandals crunching on the dry earth. They looked up at the walls of water, shimmering and swaying but holding firm. Mothers clutched their children, elders leaned on their staffs, eyes wide. The whole nation began to move, thousands strong, a river of people flowing through the sea. Kids pointed at fish swimming in the watery walls, their fear turning to wonder. For a moment, the sound of Pharaoh's army faded, drowned out by the miracle. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some grumbled, still scared, whispering about the walls collapsing or the Egyptians catching up. "What if the water falls?" one man muttered. "What if this is a trick?" But Moses kept walking, his eyes fixed ahead, trusting God's promise. The pillar of fire and cloud, God's presence, moved with them, lighting the way. It was a sight no one would forget, a nation walking through the sea, led by a man who'd bet everything on God's word. Halfway through, some looked back. The Egyptians were closer now, their chariots gleaming in the moonlight, their shouts carrying over the wind. Panic flickered again, but Moses' voice cut through. "Keep going. The Lord's got this." And they did, step by step, trusting the path would hold. The sea didn't budge. God's hand was stronger than their fear. Back on the shore, Pharaoh's army charged forward, their chariots kicking up dust like a storm. The king himself led the charge, his heart hardened once again. He'd let the Israelites go after the plagues, but his pride couldn't take it. "They're mine," he growled, his eyes fixed on the fleeing nation. His soldiers, the best in Egypt, rode hard, confident they'd crush this ragtag group of slaves. Then they saw it, the parted sea, the Israelites halfway across, and the path of dry ground stretching before them. The soldiers hesitated, their horses snorting nervously. "What kind of sorcery is this?" one captain muttered. But Pharaoh's voice cracked like a whip. "After them. Now." The army surged forward, chariots rattling onto the seabed, spears gleaming, determined to drag the Israelites back to slavery, or worse. The Egyptians didn't know it, but they were riding into a trap. The same God who'd parted the sea for his people had no intention of letting Pharaoh win. The Israelites, now nearing the far shore, could hear the clatter of chariots behind them. Fear spiked again, but Moses kept them moving. "Don't look back," he shouted. "The Lord's delivering us." The pillar of fire and cloud shifted, blocking the Egyptians' path, slowing their advance with a wall of divine light. As the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore, breathless and trembling, they turned to watch. The Egyptians were deep in the sea now, their chariots bogging down, wheels sticking in the suddenly muddy ground. Confusion spread among the soldiers. Something wasn't right. The wind was shifting, the walls of water trembling. God was about to finish what he'd started. The Israelites stood on the far shore, their feet on solid ground, hearts racing. They watched as the Egyptians struggled in the sea's corridor, their chariots sinking into the mud, their horses rearing in panic. The pillar of fire and cloud held the army back just long enough for every Israelite to reach safety. Moses stood at the edge, his staff still in hand, waiting for God's next move. Then the Lord spoke again. "Stretch out your hand over the sea," he said, "and the waters will return." Moses obeyed, raising his staff one last time. The wind died down, and the walls of water, held back by God's power, began to shake. With a deafening roar, the sea came crashing down, waves collapsing like a tidal wave, swallowing Pharaoh's army whole. Chariots, horses, soldiers, all vanished beneath the churning waters. The Israelites stood silent, their eyes wide as the sea settled, its surface calm again, as if nothing had happened. Not a single Egyptian remained. The army that had terrorized them for generations was gone, just as Moses had promised. "The Lord fights for you," he'd said, and now they saw it with their own eyes. Some fell to their knees, weeping with relief. Others stood frozen, trying to grasp the miracle they'd just witnessed. Moses turned to the people, his face lit with quiet triumph. "The Lord has delivered us today," he said. "This is his victory. The crowd erupted in cheers, their fear replaced by awe. They were free, not just from Egypt, but from the shadow of Pharaoh's power. God had made a way where there was no way. The shore was alive with celebration. The Israelites, once trembling with fear, now danced and sang, their voices rising over the sound of the waves. Miriam, Moses' sister, grabbed a tambourine and led the women in a song of praise. "Sing to the Lord, for he's triumphed gloriously," she sang, her voice carrying across the crowd. "The horse and rider he's thrown into the sea." The people joined in, their song echoing the miracle they'd just seen. Moses stood watching, his heart full. This wasn't just about crossing a sea, it was about God's faithfulness. The Israelites had doubted, grumbled, even wished to go back to slavery. But God hadn't given up on them. He'd led them through the impossible, showing them his power and love. The Red Sea wasn't just a barrier crossed, it was a promise kept. As the singing continued, the people looked ahead to the wilderness, the next leg of their journey to the promised land. It wouldn't be easy, there'd be more challenges, more doubts, more tests of faith. But this moment, this victory, would stay with them. They'd tell their kids, and their kids' kids, about the day God parted the sea and crushed their enemies. The sun rose higher, casting light on the calm waters of the Red Sea. The Israelites moved forward, no longer slaves but a free people, chosen by God. Moses walked among them, his staff a reminder of the God who'd called him, led him, and delivered them all. They thought they were trapped, Pharaoh's army behind them, the sea in front. But when Moses raised his staff, history changed forever.